Hello, my name is Charles McPherson, and today I'm sitting with marriage and family therapist Jasmine Toms. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Now let's get this interview process started. So, please summarize your approach to family therapy.
Structural family therapy came about through way of Salvador Minuchin during his time at a residential facility in Philadelphia. No, he wasn't a patient. He was actually one of the directors. And he saw the need for therapy to, maybe take a new turn, which involved the therapist being a little bit more active in the process of therapy. Pretty much what happens is during a structural family therapy session, the therapist tends to focus more on the process over the content. We focus on the here and the now. We don't focus on what the issue was years ago or what the backstory is. We focus on the way that family members interact with one another now. So, for instance, if you're in a therapy session and you see, you tend to notice that every time a husband speaks, a wife starts to fidget, or if whenever two parents begin to raise their voices, a child starts to withdraw. These are just key things that a structural therapist would look at. Another thing that makes this approach unique is the fact that the therapist is an active part, or known as a leader, of the process. So by joining the therapist, comes into the situation and they just want to learn the family's love style or their communication style, or just the ins and out of the family through watching their interactions with one another. And I think it's a very special process because it also allows the therapist to kind of bring things from their point of view into the family situation. Maybe where one family member might not have noticed that they always spoke over another one. A therapist in structural family therapy might stop and say, hey, I noticed, using I messages, I noticed that whenever Heather speaks, Brian, you always speak over her. How about instead of going into the why, let's focus on trying not to, because now that you're aware of it, let's try not speaking over Heather. I think it's a very beautiful process, in that it helps the family to grow a bond. It breaks down boundaries that are too high or sets boundaries that are too low. And it really dives into the subsystems within the family, and it does have an emphasis on gender roles, which can be kind of conflictual depending on the family. Some other key parts of just a summarization of structural family therapy are that families are seen as one big system broken down into many subsystems. So we have the parental subsystem, between a mother and a father, the spousal subsystem between a husband and a wife, and the sibling subsystem between brothers and sisters. Another key thing that we also look at in this is the family structure just overall. Is the family functional? Does the family have clear boundaries? How do they define these boundaries? How do they define what makes somebody a part of the family and what doesn't? Who gets to participate a part of the family process and who doesn't? These are all important factors. The boundaries that we often like to see, the boundaries that we really want to see, are clear boundaries. These are defined boundaries. These are, as a family, we are loving, we are supportive of each other, we are there for one another. We also allow each other to be able to have opinions and minds and speak for ourselves. But there are also rigid boundaries, which are usually seen in disengaged families, people who are separated. They're emotionally, unavailable. They lack intimacy, and they really just don't speak too much to each other. And for them, connections with people don't really last. They're either here nor there. They're always severing, I guess. And then for the enmeshed family, which is known as diffuse boundaries, they look to fix problems within themselves inside the family structure. If you're not a part of the family, then you don't understand the problem. It's one of those things where, what happens in our house stays in our house. I don't know how many of you have heard that, but what happens in our house stays in our house. We fix the problem as a family. We go to the store as a family.
What drew you to this approach personally?
The reason why I personally chose structural family therapy was because, throughout my research, one thing that I did notice was the dynamic that it covers. It covers a lot of different, regions and stuff, but the one thing that I came across in a lot of my reading were the low income communities and poverty, African American communities. And it's a personal thing to me because I am an African American woman. I do have family members who are in poverty who say that, they have family issues, and we have multi-generational issues that go on in our families, and we're not able to always sit down or get to a residential facility to be able to handle those problems. And I found it admirable that someone saw this and saw a need for change to better interact with those families, and found a way that worked not just for the comfort of the therapist, but for the comfort of the client. For a family who are extra aggressive or easy to blame one another, there's always a lot of tension. It's always nice to have a mediator. And I think the therapist serves not only as a mediator, but also as a part of the family. Because, they go through the process with you. They see how you guys interact. And it's not to the point where they're just intertwined into the patient's life.
Can you describe any key interventions to this approach?
Okay, some key interventions that I would pretty much like to bring to the forefront when it comes to structural family therapy are unbalancing. They're not in any particular order, but unbalancing, reframing, building new boundaries, and reconstruction. Okay, so with building new boundaries, of course, part of family therapy, for structural family therapy, is to help create those boundaries or lighten the boundaries that were once there. So for a family who is diffused, are also known as, enmeshed, one thing that you would do as a structural therapist is you would kind of help set boundaries. So maybe, hey, you guys like to spend a lot of time together. You guys like to be in each other's faces a lot. How about, we learn how to make new friends? How about we learn how to socialize with other people? Or for families who have like rigid boundaries, we create a time in the day where families, get together and talk. For people who don't know how to express their emotions, feelings, let's give each other, one time in the day for us to be able to sit down and say, hey, this is how my day is going, this is how I'm feeling emotionally, mentally, physically. As far as unbalancing, which unbalancing pretty much is the act of when everybody is on the underdog. Everybody is blaming one family member. Everybody is yelling at them and persecuting them. The therapist kind of comes and helps kind of balances out the situation. Instead of there being a 3-on-1, now it's a 2-on-1. May not be balanced per se, but what it does is it gives that family member who feel it as if they're the underdog a little bit more power. Power is the wrong word, but more of a comfort to be able to express themselves and to know that somebody has their side, so they don't withdraw from the process. When it comes to reconstruction is, after you've done the whole process, you've broken everything down, all the family members are starting to just, start from the beginning. It's like, okay, we've been through therapy, we've cried our tears, we've talked about the process. How do we go about fixing things? So the therapist kind of becomes a part of the process, and everybody begins to learn different strategies to fix things. We start initiating family meetings, or we start initiating family outings, or we initiate time where it's like, hey, we need to be away from each other, respecting one another, creating new rules for the family, and just a new, help rebuilding an overall new structure for the family itself. I feel that these are just some very important just as far as for me, key interventions that we use in structural family therapy.
How can you describe this approach in one sentence?
The one sentence that I would use to pretty much sum up the idea of structural family therapy would be, it's not why you're here, It's how you got here.